The main thing people know about MS is that it's debilitating and that you'll live with a disability. And some people see people with MS in a wheelchair. And I almost felt like people would think I was lying, or people would think that, oh, it can't be that bad. So going into the World Championships, I had a really good season. I knocked off a second and a half in basically a year and a half, which is massive in sport. I think there was like a preview that said Lina Nielsen might make the final. Like, she's been climbing this season. And in my head, I thought, right, some people are going to wonder what happened. Like, I came last, and I remember the team staff like thinking, what on earth is going on? You've gone and run 3 seconds slower than what you can do. And I went and did it. I went and raced at the World Championships with a relapse. I think this might be beneficial for people to hear, because I managed to go to the World Championships and I've managed to get to a high level of sport. So I don't want this to be a sob story, because it's not.
Lina, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Business of Sport.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this chat.
Look, this is a very special conversation for us to have today. I'd love it if you could just give us a little bit of information about the day in the life of a professional athlete.
I run the 400 metre hurdles, but I'd like to also slash that with the 400 metres because they're quite similar. So a day in the life for an athlete for me, as soon as I wake up, it's just hydrate as soon as you can, and then the whole day revolves around training pretty much. So how can I fuel myself? And then training will tend to start around 10 and I'll finish most days around 2 or 3 p.m. So it's, yeah, a long day of working out and training, and everything else revolves around that. So make sure the recovery's there, seeing a physio, or making sure that I get the right fuel to recover, and then to go again the next day. The main thing is to recover well enough to train as if you're training from fresh the next day. And
what about your events? What are you competing in at the moment?
At the moment, we're in a bit of a quiet phase. We just came off the indoor season and I just flew back from a training camp in South Africa. I was saying to you before, it's my 14th flight of the year. It wasn't even April at that point. So it's a lot of travelling. So we just came off a training camp, so it was very intense when you go on a training camp. I call it redlining, so like pushing your absolute limits in training, which takes a toll on your body and your mind and your spirit. So this is at the moment a deload week. So I think I'm only training 4 days this week, which is good.
Only 4 days?
Only 4 days, as opposed to 6. But also mentally as well, just coming off of the indoor season, we came away with a bronze medal in front of a home crowd, which is high emotions. And then that very same week, we flew to South Africa to train. So we didn't really get a chance to kind of decompress and, catch up with friends and stuff. So it was a very intense March, I'd say. As soon as we flew back, I said to my coach, I need to be in London for 2 weeks just to kind of be normal, which sounds really bad, but just to be like a normal person. And then we'll fly off to Florida and Bahamas for the World Relay Championship. So it's a very busy year. People just know about the Olympics, but there's so much that happens around that as well. The qualification period. We've also got the European Championships in June, which isn't too far away, which is also another opportunity to qualify for those Olympics and also to maybe come away with more medals. How
does qualification work then for the Olympics for you in the upcoming events?
Yeah, no, it's interesting actually. A lot of people don't know how track and field athletes qualify. So I know some teams have been announced, like canoeing and I want to say diving. I don't have to fact check that one, but we're actually one of the last sports to find out, which is funny because I always see track and field as the Olympic sport, like the central sport. Like the track and field stadium is always known as the Olympic stadium. It's never the swimming or the football or whatever. It's always track and field. So people always find it funny that we're the last sport to find out, or one of the last sports. So qualification is kind of twofold. You have to run a qualification, run, jump or throw, a qualification standard. So that's a certain time that I'd have to run. So in my event, it's 54.85, which is what I'd have to run. My PB is 54.73. So I've run it before, I just have to do it this year, which is a good place to be. And then if you've got the qualification standard, you then go to the Olympic trials and basically trial out for a spot. And there's 3 spots per event, per country, per gender. Okay. So 3 female 4 hurdlers from the UK can go to the Olympics, having done those 2 things. So qualification standard and coming top 3 at the Olympic trials. But then the relays, so I'm hoping to compete in the 4x4 relay as well. That actually is happening quite soon. So that's the World Relay Championships as a qualification for that. So there's not a standard per se, but there's 16 spots and we'll go and trial out for those 16 spots. So that's the next big competition happening in about a month's time. So.
And the relays is where you won the recent medals in Glasgow.
Yes.
And with your sister
Twin
Is that correct?
Yeah,
so your twin sister
yeah.
is also an elite runner.
Yes.
Same events?
So she runs the 400 metres flat. So we had to be slightly different. I had to add a bit of a challenge to my event. But yeah, it's nice to come together in the relays. We always joke that we, in Glasgow, made up half the relay team, which we did. But it was really special to kind of share that with my twin sister, because we started the sport together. And that was always one of our dreams, was to achieve, you know, high things in the sport together. So that was the first time we actually did that at 28 years old.
Amazing. So 54.83 is qualifying time.
8.5, yeah.
54.85 is qualifying time.
Yeah.
What would you expect someone to win with this summer? How far from qualification time to winning time often sits within these races? Because obviously our evaluation of time when it's something 400 or under is we're talking minutiae.
Yeah, well, to be fair, in the 400 hurdles, it's come such a long way in the past 4 or 5 years. So I think in the last Olympic Games, before that happened, the world record was 52 seconds, 52 something, I think it was 52.10, before that Olympic year. And somewhere in that Olympic year, Sydney McLaughlin of the US found 2 seconds. So now the world record is 50. So back in the day, I would have been 2 seconds away from the winning time. But now it sounds bad, but I'm almost 4 seconds away. But she's a mile ahead of everybody else. I mean, average on, you know, world class, the world final, people would be running 53, 52 high. But yeah, some athletes are just, you know, just ahead of everybody else. So yeah, in terms of like winning the Olympics, yeah, I'm about 4 seconds away, which is okay. But to get to the Olympics, most of us would be running 54 low, 53 high, yeah.
I'm really interested in what it takes for you to be able to commit everything as an athlete to athletics and be able to have it as your job. So what does the support look like from the financial perspective, from the sponsorship perspective, for you as an athlete qualifying to compete at Olympic Games and World Championships?
Most elite athletes in the world will have a shoe sponsor, so we call it a shoe sponsor. So it will be, for me, it's Puma, and they've been great in supporting me. I think this is my 4th year with them. Before them, it was Adidas for 6 years. So I've had great sponsors along, you know, the journey of my career. And then in the UK, we also are fortunate enough to have a funding system. I'm not on that funding system, so I just rely on Puma sponsorship. And then I also have a protein bar that sponsors me as well, so that's really nice as well. But we do rely on sponsors, because it is, I've done it, I've worked full-time as well as train, and it is so difficult to try and commit to training when you're working as well. And I think I only became full-time in 2022, so before that I was part-time working and actually full-time working and being a full-time athlete, which is just a lot to juggle. But we really rely on those sponsors, and it's always really nice to have those people by your side, and they do care about the athlete. They check up on you, like the people who work there and decide their sponsorships. So that in itself, having someone support you as well as financially supporting you, it's massive, and I don't think there's any athlete out there that can do it without them. So
and those sponsorships are big enough, significant enough for you to be able to, again, financially commit everything to athletics. Yeah,
I'm very, very grateful, because not everyone has those opportunities. So yeah, super, super grateful. And also in this day and age, I speak about it a lot, social media is massive for us. Very big on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, as in I'm very big fan of it, but myself and my sister...
You're a very big profile.
Trying to build it, but it's massive, the opportunities that you can get from social media as well. So my sister and I, we always say, post your little silly videos, because we posted these vlogs on YouTube. We called it Road to Budapest, which was the World Championships last year, and Road to Paris, which is the Olympics this year. So it's our Road to Paris vlogs, and they've grown actually over the past year and a half, I think, with the build up to Olympics. And we've actually got our first paid partnership on YouTube, which I didn't think we could get, you know, financial support on there, but that's also massive. So we're really lucky to have social media, I think, and some people can see it as a negative, and I see it as a massive positive. You can get such great opportunities. There's a girl in Germany who she's got about 6 million followers on Instagram, and she gets the most amazing financial opportunities. And you know, she's good in the sport, but you know, she's still growing as an athlete. And so for her to have those big like financial supporters is just shows how great social media can actually be in your journey as an athlete. It's
so important now across all sports, because the celebritization of athletes and individuals has now almost become so much more than often the badges or the teams that a lot of athletes play for or represent. And as I said, I think that provides opportunity rather than it being a stick to beat sport with, because you can, particularly in a sport where you're not necessarily funded incredibly well, for you to continue to commit a lot to that. How do you feel about that with all this kind of now, the media pressure, I call it pressure, but the media opportunities then, and also the pressure in this day and age when it comes down to race day? What does that actually do for you as a professional athlete? When in the stadium, when in the mindset, you need to get into the zone, but you've also got those kind of responsibilities and commitments to tick off as well.
I think when it comes to race day, athletes are really good at zoning in. I don't think that's ever played a part when it comes to race day for me. When I'm doing like a one-off competition, let's say a Diamond League or a Gold Meet tour or something, the only requirement that we have is to just wear the Puma kit. When it's race day or race season, even racing is the top priority, and I don't think anything can get in the way of that, especially if you've got those goals and you're super dedicated on race day and you want to tick something off the box that day. You're just thinking about the race. In it. Yeah, you're just
so you don't
there.
feel like there's a compromise now in...
No, not at all. Okay. Yeah, which is an interesting thing. But some people ask us how we vlog. Like, we vlogged the World Indoor Championships. When you're so used to it, and I think we grew up with social media. I remember when Instagram first came out, I signed up straight away, and I was on Tumblr. I don't know if everyone remembers that one, but I was on Tumblr before that. So I just kind of grew up with it. So it's just part of it. It's just part of daily life. And I think we're fortunate in this generation that we had that. So it's not something that we had to learn or pick up or make sure to put into our day. It's just something that we had growing up. And sometimes in the season, I do think, I haven't really done much social media stuff, but it's never something that I have to really stress about and think about doing and committing to. It's just...
But it's also great. It's just such a useful way now to bring kind of more eyeballs to what you do. The reason I ask at the start, the day in the life of an athlete, is because right now the content around that is often so interesting to people because they see what you're like on race day because that's on the BBC.
Yeah.
But no one knows
what
happens before it.
Yeah.
The England Rugby did one with Maro Itoje in the build up to one of their games, and it was literally him at the breakfast bar, him at the lunch bar. But that people love because it's such an interesting thing to get an insight to.
Yeah, I think before the World Indoor Championships, talking about vlogs, we did, I think, four or five episodes of our training. We trained in Denmark, so it was super cold, and how we were suffering on the floor, absolutely exhausted. And then we showed leading up to those races before you get to the British Championships. And then when we got the world medal, a lot of the comments on YouTube was I feel like we were part of this. We saw everything that happened before you got there. And someone said it feels like watching your best friend's race because we just show everything. And I asked one of my closest friends to watch the vlogs, and I said, can you make sure that we're being our complete selves in this vlog? I don't want to make it seem like we're pretending or anything. So he watched it and he said, there's so many Nielsenisms happening in the vlog. So
what does he mean by that?
Just the quirkiness that we have together, the private jokes that we make. He just meant this is so you, and you're being completely yourself. So when people watch that, and people can always tell when something's genuine. It doesn't take a lot to see something go, they're being fake or they're not being their true selves. But we try to be our utmost true selves, and I think it shows. And when we won the bronze medal, everyone just in the comments were like, yeah, we've been there, we've seen everything, we know what it's like. Thank you for showing us behind the scenes, because there's so much that happens in a World Championships behind the scenes, and we have an all-access pass with our accreditation. So I wasn't competing in the individual event, my sister was. So while she was competing, I still had about 3 days until the relay. So I would go around, show where the media would be and where the warm-up area is and the tents that we have as countries, what that looks like. And no one ever sees those bits. There's always the start line, but we turn up to the stadium 2 hours before we race. There's so much that happens in 2 hours before we step on that start line. So I enjoy doing it. And when I was younger, I would have loved to see what people are doing behind the scenes. So we always think about speaking to our younger selves, what would we have liked to see? And it's really nice. And a lot of the people that come up to us in real life at British champs or the world champs are always 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, and that's what we always think about when we do those vlogs and social media.
I want to move to Oregon 2022 and the World Championships, because this is when your story really took a turn in the public eye, and yet your experience previously had obviously been quite continual, but we weren't aware of it. Can you talk to us about what happened at the Oregon World Championships in 2022? Yeah,
so the 2022 World Championships were my first ever World Championships. I was 26, I think I was. And throughout my whole career, I've lived with MS. I got diagnosed when I was 17, but had first symptoms when I was 13. So pretty much half my life I've been living with MS, and I was pretty healthy for 5 years. I had no relapses, no symptoms, nothing. And I almost in the back of my head forgot that I had this condition. And then,
can you just what actually is multiple sclerosis?
So multiple sclerosis, or MS, is an autoimmune condition of the nervous system. So your body mistakes your nervous system for not being yours and attacks it. And so you have what we call relapses, where there'll be a bit of inflammation somewhere along your spinal cord or in your brain, which will then impact a certain nerve or a set of nerves, and then you kind of lose function. So in the past, I've had like double vision where my optic nerve there's been inflammation around that nerve. So signals aren't quite being sent down the nerve, and then something happens with your vision. So for me, it was double vision, and I've had like a block of vision. So I couldn't see like top right corner of my eye. It's just really weird stuff like that. It's such weird symptoms that you experience. And it's incurable and chronic, so lifelong, and there's no cause that we know of so far. Hopefully in the future there will be, and no cure. So it's something that you will live with for the rest of your life, yeah.
And at these World Championships, in the run up to it, you started having the first onsets of a relapse.
Yeah. 2 days before the heats of the World Championships, which is just bad timing. Just completely, I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was just the worst thing that could have ever happened. I think it's actually one of the worst things that has ever happened in my life. I try to stay as calm as possible because I've dealt with so many relapses. Before those 5 years of completely symptom-free living, it just felt like every month there was something, and it was really minor things. The first ever symptom I experienced was my left arm was weak and not quite coordinated. So I could lift up my arm to a certain extent, and then after that I couldn't lift it. I could form a fist but not a strong fist. So it was kind of like slow movements, but I could still kind of get on with life. I'm right-handed, so when I had the left-handed symptom at 13, I just carried on because I was right-handed. And then what led to my diagnosis was double vision in March of that year. I was doing my A-levels, and then later that year was just the right side of my body just completely just stopped working, and that was I think the worst symptom to date that I've ever experienced. But I kind of after that was just getting relapses like numbness in certain areas of my body, and I kind of learned to kind of get on with life and deal with them. So when I had the relapse in 2022, it started off with numbness on the left side of my torso, and I knew they would spread. Just because from the past I knew what the patterns were going to be, so I knew it was going to spread. I thought that'd be it, right? Just calm down, it's just numbness. You can run with numbness, you've done it before. But then kind of like the day before my heat, I noticed that the right side was starting to lose a bit of function, and I just broke down into tears and didn't tell anyone on the team. My sister knew, obviously. I shared a room with her, so
no one knew that you'd been living with MS.
Well, my closest friends, my boyfriend, my mum, and just a close circle of people knew.
But not in the professional circle.
Not in the team, like the team staff didn't know. My personal physio knew, but he wasn't part of the team. So I actually contacted him. I was just like, this is happening. Was battling that day, so the day of my heat, whether I would compete or not. So it was, the numbness it was just the whole left side of my body. That didn't affect me too much, but it was the starting to lose that mobility on the right side. And I was running, and it was kind of like a little bit like limpy, and my coach knew as well. So I said to my coach, can you just like watch me run and see if you can do you notice anything? And obviously I'm a hurdler, so I have to land on one leg, and I hurdle off both legs, so I knew I'd have to land on the right leg at some point in the race. And I was battling whether or not I wanted to do the race, but it had taken me so long to make those World Championships. I've battled with so many relapses. And I said, if this is my first and last World Championships and you don't go and run, you will regret it in the future. So I just told myself, spike up and go and do those 2 hours before you get to the start line. And then it was all such a blur. And stood on the start line, I just thought, just don't fall over, just get to the finish, get to the finish. I started off really well, but when you don't have the same mobility on that right side, the power you lose power a lot quicker. And I got tired so quickly. I think 220 metres into the race, I was like, oh my God, I'm fading now. And I just told myself, just get to the finish line. And when I got to the finish line, my sister was kind of stood near the finish line, and I just broke down into tears. But I don't regret doing that at all. I think I would have regretted it more had I said, I'm not going to race. I just told myself, just do it, just go and race.
Why did you feel then was the time to be open with everyone about the condition?
Yeah, so going into the World Championships, I had a really good season. I knocked off about, I think it was a second, maybe a second. Oh, the year before I knocked off a second, and then that year I knocked off half a second off my PB. So it was quite a quick development. And to be fair, the majority of it was because I was healthy, so I could actually train properly. So I knocked off a second and a half in basically a year and a half, which is massive in sport. And I was running the Diamond League circuit, so that's the highest level before you get to the World Championships. So those races are big races, and I was coming 4th and 5th in those races, which is great because a lot of people say the Diamond League races are like the final of the World Championships. So going into those World Championships, I was ranked 13th in the world, and there's 8 in the final. So I think there was like a description or like a preview that said, you know, so-and-so will make the final, so-and-so will win these medals, and Lina Nielsen might make the final. Like she's been climbing this season. And in my head, I thought, right, some people are going to wonder what happened. Like I came last, did I come last? Yeah, I came last in my heat. Didn't come last overall, but I came last in my heat. Didn't even make the semi-final, which was just a big surprise. And I remember the team staff like thinking, what on earth is going on? You've gone and run 3 seconds slower than what you can do. Probably 4 seconds, because at the World Championships you'd peak. So I might have PB'd at those World Championships. In my head, I'm 4 seconds slower than where I should be. And I remember just speaking to like my friends, my sister, my boyfriend, and just saying, I think I want to explain what happened. Like, I think it's time, like I'm ready. And I went and did it. I went and raced at the World Championships with a relapse. I think this might be beneficial for people to hear. Me thinking it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. I thought I was just going to explain to people.
It was a really big deal.
It was a really big deal. I thought it was just going to be like one little article in the corner of the sports section of the newspaper. And
pretty much front of BBC Sport, wasn't it?
It was crazy. And I remember, so I wanted one specific journalist to speak to because I'd just known him for years. And I think he wrote for the Evening Standard, I can't quite remember, but I said, I'm going to speak to him. What should have been a 20-minute interview was 2 hours of me just like saying everything. And it was just a massive spread in the newspaper, like 2 days before the Commonwealth Games. That was a very busy season. And I thought, right, okay, it's going to be in the paper and then people forget about it. But the rest of that season was just crazy. It was a lot of interviews, a lot of interest. And
how did you handle that? Because suddenly, did people look at you in a different way? Did you feel more exposed? Was it uncomfortable at the same time as probably being quite relieving to have something off your chest that you had been keeping under wraps for so long?
It was definitely, I felt so vulnerable. I felt like I was competing naked. I was like, everyone sees everything now. It was just very vulnerable. But at the same time, I was in the forefront of my mind. I was recovering from this relapse, both mentally and physically. So that was the only thing I really focused on. But I did feel very vulnerable going to the Commonwealth Games. Lots, like I remember just being stared at, like throughout the park, the Commonwealth Park, and even in the warp area, like, you know, the Jamaican athletes came up to me and were like, oh my God, like I read your article, like, and I was like, how do you know about this? You guys are in Jamaica, like what's happening?
I think the main reason on that, and I think everyone would agree who's listening to this, is you've competed at the highest level for 9 years with a huge additional weight on your shoulder that other athletes don't have to deal with, and you've done it achieving at the same time. So from an inspirational perspective, from knowing what they probably have to deal with without this, to understand what you've had, it's probably quite an incredible realization for some of your peers.
I think so, yeah, and even to this day, like the respect I get from my peers, I've been PBing quite a lot this year.
Excellent.
Which is great. I'm healthy, which is great, and knock on wood. But I competed in the 100 metres, which I never do, and I PB'd. And I still get messages from my 4 hurdlers, I think my rivals, essentially, but they're so happy to see it. So it's really nice. But going back to what you said, you know, competing all this time, I was, you know, diagnosed at 17 and been living with it since I was 13. So for me, it's normal life in a way. So I've never really seen it as something new or something that I have to now learn to deal with. It was just always, you know, in the background of my life. I think for me, the hardest part was doing my A-levels with MS, because I was right-handed and the whole right side of my body stopped working. I had to have a laptop at sixth form where everyone else had pen and paper, and so for me, that was hard as well because, you know, in school and you're so self-conscious at that age. And I'm like, what are people thinking? Like, I didn't really tell my classmates. My teacher knew and my best friends. And yeah, that was a hard thing to deal with. But yeah, in sport, I've always just seen it as just being so lucky that I can do sport and so fortunate that I can do it. But yeah, it was very well received, I think, you know, sharing my MS diagnosis. I thought I would get a lot of hate for it.
Really? Why?
Yeah, because lots of people know MS. The main thing people know about MS is that it's debilitating and that you'll live with a disability. And some people see people with MS in a wheelchair, and I almost felt like people would think I was lying, or people would think that, you know, oh, it can't be that bad. So I tried not to make it. I remember saying to the journalist, I don't want this to be a sob story, because it's not, because I managed to go to the World Championships and I've managed to get to a high level of sport. So in whatever you do not write this as a sob story. And I remember saying that was my #1 rule, do not make this a sob story. I just want to share what I had, you know, had to go through at the World Championships. I was waiting almost for messages to come through, or, you know, you're lying, it's not that bad, get on with it. But I had one message.
There'll always be one.
Yeah, there was one. And then it was about 500 of really positive messages. So
we mentioned it earlier, the guilt complex that can often come with this. You know, Harry and I have lived with a family that has had to deal with MS for 15 years with mum, and, you know, she has relapsing remitting like yourself. Yeah. The language around it I always find difficult. You know, again, for people who don't know, the relapsing remitting is, you know, the side where you have a relapse but you can recover. Mm-hmm. And you always want to say it's the good type, but yeah, you feel horrible, you know, saying good or bad or anything in and around it, because there's so many different parts of it. Yeah. But to see you being able to compete in the highest performing environment while having MS probably provided people who had just been diagnosed or had had it for a long time with a huge amount of inspiration and hope.
Definitely, and I got reached out to. I made sure, so I released the article with the journalist, and then I think soon after that I was on BBC Breakfast. I think it was about 3 or 4 days after the Commonwealth Games, so it was very, very quick turnaround. And that, after BBC Breakfast, my Instagram DMs just blew up. Twitter as well, which I hardly ever use, was blowing up. And I had all these messages, and I'd see them coming through, and I had to turn off like my notifications and stuff. But they were such personal messages that I felt like I had to sit down and read and take in every single one so that I could reply. I felt like there was almost a social responsibility to do it, to give that hope and to give just another side, you know, of how MS can manifest itself. And I got reached out to by an Olympic skier, an up-and-coming gymnast. So many young people living with MS. And it just made me realise that there's so many of us out there who just want to continue doing what we're doing and not be held back by this label, this diagnosis. And in a way, before I released or spoke about my story, I hadn't really fully accepted the diagnosis. I was only 17. It was a month before my 18th birthday. So my whole early adulthood has been shaped by this diagnosis, and I never really fully accepted it. It was always, you know, brush it underneath the carpet.
One of the most common problems.
Yeah, denial, which I think a lot of people say diagnosis is similar to stages of grief. But in a way, sharing my story made me accept it, and that's just such a positive, and I was almost empowered by it. And just like people reached out to me for, you know, hope and just, I guess, to get something off their chest, but them reaching out to me almost made me feel so much better to know that I wasn't the only one. And that was such an unexpected thing to come out of you know, sharing just my life, really. I remember when the article came out, I was actually in bed at the Commonwealth Village. I was on steroids, so I was just wiped out. Not anabolic steroids. Yeah, the anti-inflammatory steroids. I was wiped out. I was in bed and it came out. Someone sent it to me. One of my friends sent it to me. It's like, it's out, it's out, it's out. And I just remember thinking, I'm not going to show my face. I don't want anyone to see me. Like, this is like, I'm so vulnerable. And I thought the rest of my like career would be like that. Like, everyone's just watching me and like staring at me thinking, oh, she's got MS. But what came out of it was just the complete opposite of me feeling so empowered. Like, every time I stand at the start line, I just feel like I've got so many people behind me cheering me on, and that's just a nice thing to have. And I'm so excited for this next stage of my career. And I think that's also a reason why I train so well. I just feel like I have this support network.
Do you feel free?
I feel free, and I also feel pushed, you know, like with everyone that's living with this or knows someone that's living with MS. I feel like it's almost like I'm carrying their hardships with me and showing them.
So amongst all these challenges, has it, you know, and I really wouldn't feel embarrassed or anything about this, but do you think it's created opportunity where, you know, maybe you wouldn't have had that previously, to be able to do more, to be more of a spokesperson, to be front and center of, you know, a really strong community, to promote commercially opportunities to do things? You know, how did that suddenly change overnight for you as well?
I think the confidence that came off of that, and just I felt like I could really be my true self, because it's shaped so much of my adulthood. It is part of me. And so to feel that I could be my true self, and to know that I always got compared to my twin sister throughout my whole career, and she only got diagnosed at 25. And so before that, she hadn't had any symptoms, whereas me being at 17 years old, I had to learn to walk again and learn to jog again and then eventually run again. So that held me back quite a lot. So people would always ask why I'm not as quick as my twin sister, or why aren't you as good as her? Why haven't you made 15 senior teams?
So your sister has MS as well?
Yeah, so she got diagnosed at 20, just before the Tokyo Olympics. She had really minor symptoms. But I remember when I went with her to the doctor's office, and they said, because you've got a family member, we're going to really look into this. So she was really fortunate in the sense that I was diagnosed, and because there was a history in the family, they looked into it. Whereas usually, I don't know what it was like with your mum, but you would get diagnosed with like a clinically isolated symptom, or they'd throw around another term. For me, it was a stroke at 13 years old, which it wasn't, because there's such weird symptoms. I always say they're weird symptoms. One time I had numbness the lower half of my body, and how do you explain that? I was like, I can't feel my legs, but I can move, I can walk, and a lot of the time, I remember when I was 13 and I had the relapse on the left arm, and I said to the nurse, I said, I can move my hand, but I can't quite move my hand, and I can lift my arm, but I can't lift my arm. And she was looking at me like, are you okay? Are you crazy? And she accused me of wanting to get out of school. And so I was coming up with these random excuses, and I think a lot of us have that story of trying to get a diagnosis and them not listening to us. So so I say that she was really fortunate that because her identical twin sister had MS, they looked into it, and they found a really small lesion in the top of her spinal cord and said, well, okay, there you go, we're just going to diagnose you with MS. But she's not had, you know, many major symptoms. It's only been like tingling and numbness and an arm or something. So,
I mean, and I say this in athletics in general, but obviously for you, it's particularly pertinent probably. How important is that group of people immediately around you when you are competing in elite sport? Yeah,
I always say I'm really fortunate to have my twin sister in the sport. It makes it, I always say on race day, I need to have familiarity. Like I need to FaceTime something like one of my friends, or have my coach around me, just make it seem like a training session. So it's always nice when you have your twin sister, it just feels like home. That's the best way I can keep calm. And, you know, at the World Championships in 2022, she was right there at the finish line, and I just needed someone's shoulder to cry on. And it is, I think the older I get and the further I go into this career, I really see the importance of a close circle of friends and a support network.
And coach and physio.
Yeah. Yes, everything. Coach, physio. We had a nutritionist, and he actually sent us on our way because he said, I've taught you everything you need to know. You know a lot, which apparently is the best way for someone to do their job when you don't need them anymore.
Not a great business model, but...
He's like, I don't need you guys, off you go. Sports psychologist, massive as well. I really love my sports psych. Yeah, so I have an osteopath and a physiotherapist, and they're all just crucial to this journey. And they've been kind of almost carefully selected along the way. I'm like, you're the best one for this job, and so it's I always forget that you have such a big support network, but it's so important. But mainly, I think for me, I don't know if I speak for any other athletes, but the emotional support as well. They always say it's such a lonely sport. You know, you're pretty much the only one in your lane on race day. You haven't got your coach telling you, you know, do this, do that. You go through this whole lonely process with the call room, you know, and everything. So to have someone that you can call straight after the race, or, you know, speak to right after the race. And in Glasgow, that was really special because I just turned around to her. My sister was first leg and I was second leg. So the race is still going on, but we've done our part. And I remember turning around to her, I was like, I really hope we get a medal, really hope we get a medal. And just to kind of like have that like emotional outlet there, that's really special and something I'll never take for granted. But the emotional support is super, super important. So having that is special.
What's right from the kind of early days of your training, when you did have a diagnosis on the cards and then having to like go through the early parts of your career, how did you utilize data differently? Did you have to, very interested in this because of obviously the challenges it probably presents, medicate in certain ways that would allow you to kind of keep the condition under control, but also then meet all of the regulations around World Anti-Doping, etc., that I'm sure you have to go through regularly as an athlete. How did that kind of work that, again, other athletes wouldn't normally have to think about?
It's really interesting. Actually, I came into the sport not thinking I was going to be pro or elite. I just did it because I enjoyed it. So I never really took, it sounds bad, never really took it that seriously. So I never really, reported any data or anything like that. I just trained because I loved it, and I had my close circle of friends. I trained in a group of 5 girls, and we were just besties, like we're just best friends. And I just did it because I loved it, and eventually I just started getting better and better and better. So I think that was the most organic way to kind of get into the sport with this diagnosis. I also wanted to keep moving my body, so keep running to the best as I can. In my head, it helped if I could just retrain the nerves to kind of fire again, or like in my head I was like, this should help, help me retrain those movements. But at the same time, I got diagnosed in 2014, and medicine has come such a long way since then. So when I got diagnosed, they offered me, I think, 2 or 3 treatments that I could go on. And I said no to all of them because I just thought, I don't know how this is going to affect me as a teenager, me as an athlete. I wouldn't say I was an elite athlete, but I was still kind of aiming for the national championships and things like that. So I said no at first. I said, I don't know how this is going to affect me. And the side effects seemed worse than what I was treating for, if that made sense. So I felt in my head I could live with the numbness as opposed to live with the side effects that were listed. So in my head, I just said no to medication. And to this day, I'm still not on any medication. I probably will go on after the Olympic Games. But I haven't been on any medication.
So you've never had to manage that as part of your schedule and then meeting the compliance that is required?
Yeah, the only thing I had to deal with was when I had my relapse in 2022. Luckily, because I was in the team, I got to see a private doctor, which another thing people doing with MS is it's so hard to see your doctor. And he said the best thing, because I had the Commonwealth Games, go on these anti-inflammatory steroids. In hindsight, I wish I said no, but I was just doing everything I could, clutching at straws to try and get better. And I had to file a therapeutic usage exemption form, so that if it did show up in an anti-doping test, that it's called for. So that was actually quite a weird one because I'd never had to do that before. And
what about injury for you? Is that if you sprain an ankle or if you pull a muscle, does that have a different impact than you would normally expect for an athlete? For
someone living with MS?
Yeah.
I don't think so, no. I've been really fortunate. So I always say MS is my version of injuries because I've never had a major injury. I think the only one I had was a stress fracture in 2017. And that was actually the reason I told my osteopath at the time that I had MS, because it was taking a lot longer to recover than other people, but it turns out they diagnosed it wrong. So it should have taken, I think, 6 weeks, and it ended up taking like 12 weeks. And I said, oh, I've got MS, could that be a reason why it's not healing? And he said, no, that's not a reason, you're just being paranoid. But it was because they diagnosed it wrong. So I was running on a fracture in my bone. But no, it's never affected any recovery times for injuries. And luckily, I think the one thing MS has given me is I'm so in tune with my body. I always check every morning, like, is everything okay? Is everything moving properly? And even when I'm running, I'll warm up and make sure everything's in line. I take my warm-up very seriously. So in a way, MS has given me this like really hyper focus when it comes to my body. And so I feel like I'm on top of injuries and niggles and anything like that. So I've only really had that one major injury in my career, knock on wood, thank you very much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been, it comes with its pros and cons, I think.
How do you view the role of the athlete in today's society?
Oh, I see the role of an athlete as a social responsibility. So I say that a lot because nowadays we have profiles like that come with social media. And so I think we have this like obligation to almost show people what it's actually like. So for me, it's young people. Like myself and my sister have a food Instagram page, and the one thing we'll never do is count calories. Like we'll never say, this is the amount of calories you're supposed to have today. And count this, I don't believe in restriction of food. So if I have a chocolate bar, I'll put it on my Instagram. So I'm like, I had a chocolate bar today, I had an Easter egg. Because I just don't think it's the right message to send out there. And I think you'll hear a lot of post-race interviews from athletes saying, you know, I'm inspiring the next generation. I want to show the young athletes. So for me, I think as an athlete, it's such a short-lived career and the generations are always coming through. And so to show a younger athlete what it's like, I think that's a massive opportunity and obligation, but at the same time, a massive privilege to be able to show them what it's like to be an elite athlete and exactly what it takes. So I think, that's the only thing that I really think about.
If you're up for it, we'll do a quick fire round where you
Okay.
put some questions
Okay.
and see what's the best thing about being an athlete for you.
I would say the best thing is, I know I complain about it a lot, the travel, but it's also the best thing because like I've seen so much of the world like in small bits, because I'll go to Rome and see the Colosseum for like 2 minutes and then go see the stadium. The travel, I think, and also just the opportunities as well. Like we get to work with like so many different brands, and then you get gifted all these little things when you do work with those brands. So that's also like, one of the best things, I think.
14 flights is a lot, though, isn't it?
In 3 months.
In 3 months. I'm not surprised. And it's not going to stop here, is it, for you either?
It's not, a lot of travel happening soon.
If you could give one piece of advice to someone who is newly diagnosed with MS, what would that be?
I'd say take the time to listen to your body, because it manifests itself so differently in so many people. If you can kind of spot patterns on how relapses show in your body, and for me, I always look at my gut health as soon as I get a relapse. In my head, that's what works best, and it might not be the scientific reason, but in my head, I feel better knowing that. So I always study my body and do your own research, and take your time with the acceptance of the diagnosis. Don't rush that, because it is a massive thing to live with.
Who were your inspirations growing up from a sporting perspective?
Definitely Jessica Ennis-Hill. We got to...
Friend of the show.
She just showed... I remember looking at her at the 2012 Olympics, because I volunteered there. We volunteered for her race, and I remember looking at her thinking, she's so normal. She's just normal. She's a normal person. And I think she shows that as well in her everyday life, just that she's just a normal human being who trained really hard and achieved her goals. So definitely her.
Great answer.
Yeah.
She's amazing. She's fantastic. Yeah. What keeps you up at night?
My dog.
That's the best answer that we've had so far from that question a few times.
My dog. Do you know what it is? We're so privileged as athletes to be able to just work for our goals. So I always think about the session the next day and how I can make it better. And I visualize my race so much, so that keeps me up at night. Every hurdle, what do I do?
Really?
Yeah, it's massive, especially when...
Does it vary race to race?
So the start of the season, you're still with heavy training legs. So you don't quite have the same stride length, the same frequency, because you have heavy legs basically from training. So my stride pattern changes as the season goes on. So I'll think about the last practice I had over the hurdles and how that felt, and then I'll visualize my race, think, okay, maybe I'll take my stride pattern, this many steps to hurdle 1 and this many steps to hurdle 7 or 8, and then figure it out. So it's quite an interesting event actually, but it does change. And then the championships, that will be your cemented race pattern. So before you get to the championships, you're like, okay, this is the race pattern, and hopefully I can get it. So it's a lot of visualization, because it does change. It's different to the 100 hurdles where you'll do 3 steps in between all the hurdles. In the 400 hurdles, everyone has a different step pattern to hurdle 1. And
how many hurdles are there?
10.
And spaced out at?
35 metres. So 45 metres to the first hurdle, 35 metres in between all, and then 40 metres from the last hurdle to the finish line.
And the 100 for those 3 steps in between?
I think it's like 8:13, 8 metres,
really?
Something really random, 8:27, something. I'm not entirely sure, but it's they'll always have 3 steps, and it's so short. Whereas in the 400 hurdles, you'll have fatigue at some point in the race, and it happens differently for everyone. So you'll have to step down. So you'll go from 15 strides to 16 strides, or 14 strides to 15 strides. So you will have to change the hurdle leg somewhere in the race. So it's very mentally challenging, for sure. But actually, one of the good things that came from doing the 2022 World Championships with a relapse is that I now know I can hurdle whatever happens.
I was going to say, you're going to do better now just from that knowledge.
I really trust my hurdling. Like, that's actually a really big positive that came out of that. I really, really trust my hurdling, because I couldn't feel my left leg, and I still did. And I'm a left leg hurdler, so the left leg goes over the hurdle. So I still managed to do that. So I have full faith in my hurdling. that's a big positive that came out of those championships.
So, okay, we're going to put you at the head of the IAAF. You have the opportunity to change one thing in the sport. What would that be?
I wouldn't change the long jump board because there's a big debate happening there.
Why not, interestingly? Because I was having this discussion with people the other day.
Yeah, they're doing this thing where they're going to have a takeoff zone, which I just think is ridiculous because it takes away the essence of the long jump. You train to be able to take off at the right time, the right distance.
Wasn't it just a different way of providing them with another line that they can overstep?
I wouldn't change that. So if I was head of the IAAF, I wouldn't, or World Athletics as it's known now, I wouldn't change the long jump board. And what would I change? I would get rid of the world ranking system. I don't think it works for anyone, which is a big controversy. I would just go back to the way it was, which is just get a standard and come top 3 at the trials, which is what I explained earlier. But there's now this added way of qualifying, which British Athletics don't agree with, so they don't listen to it basically, which is a world ranking system. So,
how does that work?
So I think for each event there's a quota of athletes that can be in that event. So I think for the 4 hurdles it's 38 or 40 athletes that can go to the Olympics in the 4 hurdles. So if you don't get the standard, if you're ranked in the top 40, you'll get sent an invitation. So they came up with this ranking system to say half the quota will be through standards and the other half will be through rankings. But a lot of federations, UK Athletics being one of them, has decided that they're not going to do that. And the one reason the World Athletics have upped the qualification standards is to make sure that people qualify by rankings. So they've made the standard a lot harder. So it makes it a bit more difficult to qualify for the Olympics and the World Championships, which is just, it has never been that way in the past. So I just don't think it needs to, I didn't think it needed to change, if I'm being honest. Yeah, so just to give an insight, the Olympic standard for Rio Olympics was 56 seconds and now it's 54.85. So it's come a really long way, yeah. So, and
that is a big difference.
Yeah, and even though it's 1.15 seconds, that's massive in the 400 hurdles. And even in the 100 meters, you effectively have to run like sub 11 for a woman, which is just crazy. So it's basically, get to Olympic Games. So there's so much politics that goes into it. It depends on the races that you do. So if you get to the Diamond League, you get more points for the ranking system, but then to get the Diamond League, you need a good agent, and then it becomes this whole who you know instead of what you've actually run. So I could go on forever. There's a lot of politics involved. I would just get rid of it.
That's sport.
Just leave it to be who runs the fastest can go.
Stop overcomplicating it.
Yeah, stop overcomplicating it.
Pre-race meal, what are we cooking?
Oh, so okay. I'll always have oats on race day. I do overnight oats. And then I go low protein, high carbs. Yeah, so because protein takes a lot of energy to digest, I'll try and cut it out. Or have an easy protein, so like fish. Something easy because I hate eating on race day, so I'll go for like pasta or rice, something that I can just easily eat and not think about.
How long before a race would you do that?
So I always cut off, so I always stop eating 3 hours before a race, and that's my cut off. So some people say 4 hours, but I'll just be racing hungry. So yeah, I do 3 hours. Some people do 4 hours. Some people don't eat on race day, which is crazy to me. That's mainly the short sprinters who don't really need that high energy expenditure. But for me, 3 hours is the perfect amount of time. And then I'll take like energy gels through warm up and stuff. But yeah, that works for me.
Day in the life is interesting. Final one from me. Career post athletics. What will you do?
People have been asking me this recently because I'm 28 now and they're like, retirement's happening soon.
Sport's so brutal,
I know,
isn't it?
I'm still young, please. I'd like to still be in the fitness space. I think also with the platform that myself and my sister have created, I think it would be a shame to just throw that away. So I'd love to stay in the fitness space. I'm also a qualified yoga instructor, so I'd love to go back to teaching yoga the way it was before the pandemic. That'd be great. Just to inspire, I'd like to be a bit more prevalent in the MS space as well, to kind of do. You can
do them together. You can tie them in. Right?
Yeah. I'd love to also teach yoga to people with MS. I think it's a massive area for people with MS to explore. So I'd love to be the go-to person for that. Yeah, there's just so much, but I would love to stay in the fitness space. That'd be amazing, and then maybe a bit of media as well. That'd be good.
It's such an important conversation. I'm so grateful that you've come and opened up as you have and talked to us properly about that. I think a huge number of people will resonate and take serious inspiration from everything you've said, and also those that don't know so much about it will also be incredibly inspired by the story, I'm sure. So. Thank you for coming in. It's been really, really great to chat.
Thank you for having me. No, it's been really nice. I feel like the time's just flown by. It's great. Yay.